Good evening friends, my name is Abhishek and I head the CL Gorakhpur Center. But yeah, that's not something important. What's more important is that I'm a CAT trainer for Pond, LR and DI. And this video is basically a precursor, a preview of the workshop that I'm going to conduct on the 2nd of November 2 to 5 p.m. which is Thursday. So this workshop would be exclusively for NMAT 2017. Now I expect somebody who is targeting to get into the top 20-25 B schools of the country would definitely be going for NMAT. The reason that this workshop becomes extremely important is that NMAT is a different ball game altogether. Now somebody who has been seriously preparing for CAT, somebody who has been giving mocks on the lines of CAT, it becomes really important to tweak your strategy to perform well in an examination like NMAT. Now the reason I say this is because of these two things. One, 120 questions, 120 minutes, which means you get near about a minute for a question. But yes, definitely that's not the perfect catch. The catch lies in the sectional timings that I'll be discussing later on. And the second thing is no negative marking, which means at the end of your examination, if you walk out of the center, it shouldn't happen that you haven't attempted all the 120 questions, as simple as that. So if I talk about the examination, the total marks is 360. The total questions are 120, which means 3 marks per question, and you aren't awarded any negative marks for attempting question wrongly. And the total time which is given is 120 minutes. Now 120 questions in 120 minutes with different sectional breakup. So time management takes the front seat in an examination like NMAT. Now there are 3 sections in which the examination paper is divided. The first one being language skills, the other one logical reasoning, and the last one quantitative skills. There is no specific order in which you are supposed to attempt these 3 sections. The order can be chosen by the candidate. So yes, we'll be discussing upon the best possible option, the best possible way of attempting these sections basis your strengths and weaknesses. So we'll be discussing that in the workshop. Now if I specifically talk about these 3 sections, so first section being the language skills, the number of questions 38, time 22 minutes. So here is the catch: 32 questions, 22 minutes. Now these 32 questions would be having questions based on verbal ability, all the different topics of VA and RC. Now attempting RC and VA in 22 minutes becomes extremely difficult. So there is no possibility that you will be able to attempt all the 32 questions with the same intent in the 22 minutes. So it becomes extremely important that you decide what are the questions, what are the sections that you have to give a perfect hit on, and what are the sections that you are going to take a guess, because there is no negative marking. Now if I talk about the sectional cutoff for the past 3 years for the verbal ability section, the language skill section, it's 55 marks in 2016, 50 marks in 2015 and 55 marks again in 2014. Now which brings me to the fact that 60 turns out to be a safe figure if there is no drastic change in the level of the paper or pattern of the paper, which is definitely not going to happen because we have seen a couple of slots which have already happened for the NMAT 2017. So there is no drastic change in the pattern of the paper. So I can very safely say that 60 is a safe score, which means 20 questions. Now getting 20 questions right out of 32 questions, it's not very difficult, but it's not that easy also. We will be discussing in the workshop how to target these 20 questions, which are the sections wherein you can target the questions so that you can come up to a number of 20 in these 22 minutes. Now if I talk about the second section, which is logical reasoning, so 40 questions, 38 minutes, which means you get near about a minute to attempt the logical reasoning questions. Now the LR section would contain analytical reasoning and it would also cover the critical reasoning. There is an important weightage of critical reasoning in the logical reasoning section, so you have to be very careful about the critical reasoning part. We'll be discussing in the workshop how we can go about critical reasoning and analytical reasoning, how we can split the time so as to maximize the score in this section. Now, if I talk about the sectional cutoff for the last 3 years in this section, it's 61 in 2016, it's 55 in 2015 and 61 in 2014. Now, if I can score somewhere around 72 marks in this section, which means 24 questions out of 40 questions. Believe me, it's not very difficult if you are able to manage the time. The questions are pretty much doable. So you can definitely do 24 questions correct out of the 40 questions in a span of 38 minutes, provided that you split the time in an efficient manner. Now, if I talk about the third section, which is quantitative skills, so it has 48 questions in 60 minutes, which is somewhere around 1.25 minutes per question, which is a decent time per question for this section. Now, as far as the last 3 years cutoff is concerned, 2016 it's 74, 15 it's 70, 14 again it's 70. Now, if I target a score of 84, which is 28 questions in this section out of 48 questions, it's pretty much doable because the level is not that difficult, but the section becomes tricky because the QA section, it covers the QA questions plus the DI, and this year in the different slots that have already happened, we have seen at least 4 or 5 DI caselets popping up in the different slots, which brings me to the number 16 or 20. So this is the number of DI questions which are coming this year in NMAT. So you have to be a bit careful about attempting the DI questions because the DI caselets have been a little calculation intensive as well. So ultimately it boils down to time management, the kind of questions you have to go for in the first go, and what are the questions that you can keep it for the round 2. Now, as far as the total cutoff is concerned, for the last 3 years, it was 208, 208 and 209. Now, if I sum up the safe sectional scores, which I have discussed in the last couple of minutes, it's 60 plus 72 plus 84, which is 8, 7, 15, 6, 210, 14, 16. 216, which is a pretty safe score to get into NMIMS Mumbai. So these cutoffs which I have been discussing in the last couple of minutes, this is obviously for NMIMS Mumbai campus. So if you are able to get to these individual sectional scores, you will be very comfortably clearing the sectional cutoffs, and this will account to a total score of 216, which means you will be very comfortably placed as far as your final selection is concerned in NMIMS Mumbai campus. So we will discuss about these 3 sections in great detail in the workshop on 2nd of November. So you can stay tuned with us to dwell more into the different sections, to take a deeper dive into these 3 sections for NMAT 70. So yes, it's 2nd of November, 2 to 5 p.m. All the best. Thank you. Have a good day.